Evelyn Nesbit was that stunning model who inspired the Gibson Girl, America's first beauty icon. But behind her captivating smile lay a haunting story of ambition, betrayal, and exploitation. Evelyn's rise from poverty to fame placed her at the mercy of powerful men, including the celebrated architect Stanford White, whose dark secrets were hidden behind his architectural masterpieces like the Washington Square Arch. But when White was murdered in a fit of jealous rage, the ensuing scandal rocked the nation. Named the trial of the century, it exposed spine-chilling details of a toxic love triangle and captivated the world. This isn't just a story of fame and tragedy, it's a tale of how society exploits beauty, fame, and power. Harry Thaw, a man in his mid-30s from a wealthy family who married Evelyn Nesbit. She was a young woman who had captured the world's attention with her delicate beauty. Evelyn, once called Florence Mary Nesbit, had become one of the first it girls, admired for her charm and grace. She rose to fame as a model and chorus girl, but her life was far from the glamorous image that films like The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing and books like Ragtime would later portray. Evelyn's story began in 1900 when she moved to New York with her mother after her father passed away, leaving the family in financial trouble. At just 15, Evelyn started working as an artist's model, posing for painters and stained glass designers. Her striking beauty made her a star, and she quickly became one of the original Gibson Girls, a symbol of beauty and fashion. Advertisers loved her, and soon she was performing as a chorus girl on Broadway. But Evelyn's rise to fame came with a price. Her mother, desperate to secure a better future, encouraged her relationships with wealthy older men. And one of them was Stanford White, a famous architect but with a dark side. White had a reputation for preying on young women, though his charisma and charm often hid his true nature. In her memoir, Evelyn described him as a man who could be both kind and cruel, always keeping people under his spell. White first noticed Evelyn when she performed in a Broadway show called Florodora. He arranged to meet her through a mutual friend, Edna, at a toy store that secretly led to one of his private apartments. White, who was 46 at the time, nearly 3 times Evelyn's age, greeted her warmly and treated her to a delightful lunch. His charm and attention quickly won her over. White began showering Evelyn with gifts, fancy meals, and luxurious experiences she had never imagined during her impoverished childhood. During one visit to his apartment, White introduced Evelyn to a room decorated with fake vines and a red velvet swing. He encouraged her to try the swing, which she found thrilling. Over time, White financed dental work for Evelyn, arranged high-profile modeling gigs, and helped her family by paying for her brother's education. He even befriended Evelyn's mother, creating an illusion of trust and support. But behind White's kindness was a calculated plan to gain Evelyn's trust. He acted like a father figure while slowly revealing his true intentions. Though some people in White's circle knew of his predatory behavior, they were too afraid of his influence to warn Evelyn. By the time she realized the truth, it was too late. She was already caught in his web. At this point, Stanford White convinced her mother to leave Pittsburgh, entrusting him with Evelyn's care. This was the beginning of a dark chapter in her life. One evening, White invited her to a party, but when she arrived, she realized she was alone with him. He encouraged her to drink champagne, something she wasn't used to, and let her keep drinking. Afterward, he led her to a strange room in his apartment, a mirrored space with an unsettling atmosphere. He gave her more champagne, which tasted unusually bitter. Evelyn began feeling dizzy and disoriented. Her vision blurred, and she eventually passed out. When she woke up, she was terrified and confused, finding herself partially naked on a bed beside a bloodied and naked White. He tried to calm her, begging her not to scream, but she was horrified. The next morning, White told her what happened was normal and warned her to stay silent. Otherwise, she'd face rejection from everyone around her. Evelyn was deeply shaken, but tried to carry on, numbing herself to the trauma. But then came Harry Thaw, a wealthy but deeply troubled man who was obsessed with her and hated White, seeing him as a predator, though Thaw himself was no better. His erratic and violent behavior had already gotten him kicked out of New York's elite circles. When Thaw first approached Evelyn, he pretended to be someone else and made an overly dramatic introduction, which left her uneasy. Despite his attempts to charm her and turn her against White, Evelyn still felt emotionally tied to White and saw Thaw as a dangerous man. Thaw's past was full of cruelty. He lured young girls with false promises only to abuse them. To protect Evelyn, White sent her to a boarding school in New Jersey, but Thaw's network of spies found her anyway. When Evelyn fell seriously ill, her mother reached out to Thaw for help. He arranged for an emergency surgery, gaining the family's trust. After she recovered, Thaw took Evelyn to Europe, trying to win her. During this trip, Evelyn was still weak from her illness, and Thaw's true nature started to show. He grew violent, even attacking a bellboy in London. In Paris, Evelyn confided in Thaw about the trauma White had caused her. At first, he appeared sympathetic, but his mood quickly changed. He became obsessed with her past and consumed with rage. While they were in Bavaria, Thaw's violent side fully emerged. Over 2 weeks, he assaulted Evelyn, leaving her deeply traumatized. When they returned to the U.S., White tried to help her again, but Thaw had manipulated her into believing White was her enemy. At just 18, Evelyn married Thaw in a private ceremony. She wore a black wedding dress, almost as if it symbolized the darkness ahead. Soon, Thaw's paranoia spiraled out of control. He believed White was plotting against him and became more controlling and abusive toward Evelyn. Evelyn regretted marrying Thaw and often thought about her time with White. Though White had caused her pain, he had also shown her moments of kindness, something she never felt with Thaw. Evelyn's life with Thaw was a never-ending nightmare, filled with regret, abuse, and shattered hopes. Finally, it was June 25, 1906, a night that started like any other for Harry Thaw and his wife, Evelyn Nesbit. They had dinner at Sherry's, then went to a show at Madison Square Garden. Harry had already had a few drinks by then, but that didn't stop him from drinking more when they moved to Café Martin. But Evelyn grew uneasy when she spotted Stanford White there. She knew how much Harry hated him. Quietly, she scribbled a note and passed it to her husband. It read, "The beast is here." Trying to stay calm, the couple eventually returned to Madison Square Garden, but there was one thing that stood out. Harry refused to check his coat, a strange decision that seemed tied to his hatred for White. During the show, White appeared, sitting in his usual spot. Evelyn noticed a shift in Harry's mood. Sensing trouble, she suggested they leave, and their friends agreed. But before anyone could act, Harry vanished into the crowd. Moments later, he was standing behind White, and without warning, Harry pulled out a pistol and shot White right in the head, 3 times, killing him instantly. Everything happened just so suddenly. As the crowd erupted in screams and chaos, Harry didn't try to run. Instead, he calmly declared he had it coming to him. To Evelyn, who was visibly shaken, Harry reassured her, saying he'd saved her life. The murder led to one of the most talked-about trials in history, called the Trial of the Century. The press had a field day, especially the so-called yellow press, which thrived on exaggeration and drama. Reporters hounded Evelyn, calling her the lethal beauty, while Harry's wealth and privilege added more fuel to the fire. After his arrest, Harry seemed strangely calm. Jail didn't seem to bother him. He was treated more like a guest than a prisoner. Instead of a standard prison cot, the man had a brass bed. Brass. Like he was staying at some boutique hotel. Forget those prison uniforms, too. Thaw wore his own custom-tailored suits, looking sharp as ever. And the cherry on top, he sweet-talked the prison doctor into letting him have champagne and wine every day. Plus, he moved freely around, asked for cigars, and even claimed that divine signs had guided him to kill White. To him, White's death was a way to start fresh with Evelyn. Evelyn, however, was left to fend for herself. She stayed with a friend as the media swarmed her. Even her mother refused to support her, denying any connection to White and distancing herself from the scandal. How weird. Meanwhile, Harry's wealthy family came into action. His mother rushed back to New York from Liverpool, determined to get him out of jail. She had always disliked Evelyn, seeing her as a gold digger. But now she reluctantly asked for Evelyn's help to testify in Harry's favor. In jail, Harry continued to make headlines. He received fan mail from women who admired him as a hero, thanks to the media's portrayal. He convinced the prison doctor to give him wine and champagne as medicine and arranged for fancy meals from Delmonico's, an upscale restaurant. The drama didn't stop there. Thomas Edison's film studio released a short movie reenacting the murder called Rooftop Murder. Meanwhile, back home in Pittsburgh, the press didn't hold back. They labeled Harry a troubled man with a dark past. Despite the chaos, Harry welcomed the attention. He believed the trial would let him expose what he called a network of abusers, even though his history of violence and erratic behavior was now under scrutiny. Harry Thaw was slapped with a first-degree murder charge and denied bail. Now, from the moment Thaw pulled that trigger, the whole thing blew up into a full-blown media circus. The press went nuts. Every tiny detail got sensationalized to feed the era's love for scandal. Alongside the usual hard news reporters, there were these so-called sob sisters, journalists who specialized in over-the-top emotional storytelling. They milked the drama for everything it was worth, tugging on readers' heartstrings and making the case even more of a spectacle. Both sides, Thaw's defense and the prosecution, played the media like a fiddle. Thaw's mom? She wasn't messing around. She threw money at reporters to spin stories that made her son look good. On the other side, the district attorney teamed up with a PR firm to trash Thaw and his wife, Evelyn Nesbit. The headlines were pure gold for tabloid readers, stuff like, "Woman whose beauty spelled death and ruin." The real legal battle came down to whether Thaw had planned the murder in advance. The district attorney, William Travers Jerome, tried to avoid a messy trial by arguing that Thaw was legally insane. He figured that would keep all the dirty laundry from being aired in court. Thaw's first lawyer agreed, thinking it was the safest way to avoid the death penalty. But Thaw wasn't having it. He fired the guy, accusing him of scheming to lock him up in an asylum because of some woman pulling strings behind the scenes. Thaw's mom wasn't a fan of the insanity plea either. She didn't want her son labeled as permanently crazy. Instead, she pushed for a defense of temporary insanity, which they called a brainstorm back then. She poured $500,000 into hiring doctors to back up the idea that the murder wasn't premeditated. It was a one-time thing fueled by moral outrage. They even came up with this very American-sounding concept called dementia Americana. The gist? A man could temporarily lose his mind if he was outraged by an attack on a woman's virtue. It was a bold strategy, painting Thaw as a guy who acted out of a sense of honor rather than cold-blooded intent. Thaw went through 2 trials for the murder of White. The case got so much attention that during the first trial, the jury was kept away from the media to avoid outside influence. The trial kicked off on January 23, 1907, and by April 11th, the jury had been deliberating for hours. But they couldn't agree. After 47 hours, they were stuck, with 7 voting guilty and 5 wanting to acquit. Thaw was crushed by the split decision. He couldn't believe the jury didn't see his actions as a noble, honorable thing. He was worried they'd label him insane and lock him up in an asylum. So in January to February 1908, they held a second trial, with Thaw bringing in a new lawyer, Martin W. Littleton. This time, the defense went with the insanity angle, and it worked. The jury found Thaw not guilty because of insanity, and he was sent to the Matawan State Hospital for the criminally insane. But, since he was rich, he got special treatment there. He was living the good life, compared to the other patients. During both trials, Thaw's wife, Evelyn Nesbit, testified. There were rumors that the Thaws promised her a huge payout for her testimony, anywhere from $25,000 to $1 million. But once the trials were over, the Thaws pretty much cut ties with her and stopped supporting her financially. Later on, Nesbit's grandson claimed she got $25,000 after the second trial, but her relationship with the Thaws stayed rocky. By 1915, she divorced Thaw. After being sent to Matawan, Thaw's lawyers started pushing to have him declared sane. In 1909, they filed a writ of habeas corpus. But things took a turn for the worse when witnesses came forward with disturbing evidence. A landlady named Susan Merrill, who had rented Thaw apartments back in the early 1900s, testified about how Thaw had abused young women. She even mentioned a jeweled whip which was introduced as evidence. Thaw's own lawyer even admitted to paying $30,000 in hush money to the victims. The court wasn't having it and dismissed the petition, ruling that Thaw was still a threat to society with his chronic delusion insanity. Then, in August 1913, Thaw managed to escape from Madison with some help, including a former New York assemblyman. He made his way to Sherbrooke, Quebec, where his legal team, which included future Canadian Prime Minister Louis St. Laurent, fought extradition. But despite their efforts, Thaw was sent back to New York by December 1914. By July 1915, a jury decided that Thaw was no longer insane and he was let go. People were divided about him. Some saw him as a man who stood up for moral values, while others criticized the corruption and privilege that helped him dodge justice. The media went after both Thaw and his supporters, calling the whole thing a disgusting spectacle of wealth and moral decay. As for Nesbit, she distanced herself from Thaw, saying she was done being dragged into his legal mess. By 1916, Thaw's name was still in the headlines, and he even got charged with assault. On the other hand, for Evelyn, life with the Thaw family became a nightmare. They controlled her fate, offering support only because they needed her to help Harry. Evelyn was forced by his family to testify about how White had abused her. Evelyn didn't want to relive those painful memories, but she had no choice. Her financial future depended on Thaw's fate. During her testimony, she faced harsh and personal questions. After the first trial ended without a decision, a second trial in 1908 found Thaw not guilty because he was insane. He was sent to Madison Asylum. Despite Evelyn's sacrifices, Thaw's family stopped supporting her financially. Even Thaw himself grew bitter toward Evelyn, calling her ungrateful. Evelyn, now isolated and poor, turned to sculpting to survive. In 1910, she discovered she was pregnant, claiming the baby was Thaw's, though he denied it. So she fled to Germany, gave birth to a son named Russell, and later married a man named Jack Clifford. But even this marriage fell apart when Clifford couldn't handle the shame tied to Evelyn's past. So, Evelyn's life stayed troubled. After all these, she appeared in silent films with her son, but faced harsh public judgment. She struggled with substance abuse and attempted to end her life twice, but Russell saved her both times. After the war, she tried running a tea room and a nightclub, but both failed. When Thaw died in 1947, he left Evelyn $10,000, the same amount he gave a waitress he barely knew. Apart from that, he never supported Russell financially. And finally, in 1954, Evelyn sold her life story to 20th Century Fox. It later became the movie The Girl on the Red Velvet Swing. But the film twisted her story, glorified Stanford White, and downplayed her suffering. Despite this, Evelyn eventually found some peace in teaching sculpture and ceramics. She passed away in 1967, leaving behind a life marked by pain, resilience, and survival. So what do you think about this case? Don't you think Evelyn was shamed, tortured, and abused by all these men just because she was beautiful? Share your thought in the comments. And this is not the only case about the fall of a beauty. If you want something more mysterious, watch this one. Subscribe to the channel for more like this. See you soon.